We were able to use crime lab technology through the Santa Clara District Attorney's Office to really lock down DNA as proof that the suspect was there, was present in that apartment, and was one responsible for the murder.
It was a day like any other in San Jose, California, when a family made a horrifying discovery that would haunt them forever. They hadn't heard from Jesus Ibara in days, something that was completely out of character for him. When they arrived at his modest apartment on Nordale Avenue, they had no idea that what awaited them inside would change their lives forever. Stepping through the door, they found him, lifeless, brutally murdered, strangled with a power cord. His belongings gone, his car vanished. But it was more than just a robbery. Something about the brutality of the crime, the cold calculation of setting his car ablaze to cover tracks, pointed to a deeper, more chilling motive. Was it personal, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Who could have wanted to end the life of a hard-working, quiet man like Jesus Ibara? Why was he targeted in such a brutal manner? And how did his killer manage to stay hidden for over 37 years? In this video, we'll take you through the tragic story of Jesus Ibara's life, the shocking discovery of his murder, and how advancements in forensic technology would eventually crack the case open, providing the answers his family had been waiting decades to hear. But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. Jesus Ibara was a man of quiet strength and resilience. Born and raised in San Jose, California, he worked as a machine and sheet metal worker, a tough and physically demanding job that reflected his hard-working nature. He wasn't the type to seek attention or cause a stir. Instead, Ibara lived a modest, straightforward life, centered around his work, his home, and his family. Described by those close to him as dependable and diligent, he had built a reputation for being a solid worker, never shying away from putting in long hours at his job to ensure he met deadlines and delivered quality results. At 46, Ibara had spent much of his life perfecting his craft. In an industry where precision and attention to detail were critical, Ibara's ability to work with metal and machinery made him a valued part of his workplace. Despite the grueling nature of his work, those who knew him recall that he found satisfaction in creating and building. His hands, accustomed to the feel of cold metal and the hum of machinery, represented both his livelihood and his pride. Although he was quiet and reserved in nature, Ibara was known to have a close relationship with his family. Sundays were often spent in the company of loved ones, and he made a habit of visiting or speaking with family members regularly. Family, for Ibara, was a grounding force. Despite the long hours at work, he never let it interfere with the importance he placed on staying connected with his relatives. Yet, behind his calm demeanor and work-focused life, Jesus Ibara was a man who, like many, had aspirations and dreams beyond the factory floor. Though those dreams remain unknown to the world, what is certain is that Ibara's life was tragically cut short, and his story became less about the man he was, and more about the horrific way in which he was taken. The morning of April 22nd, 1987, began like any other in the bustling city of San Jose. The streets were filled with commuters and families going about their daily routines, unaware that a tragedy had already unfolded in a small apartment on Nordale Avenue. For Jesus Ibara's family, however, this ordinary day was about to become the most devastating day of their lives. For days, something had felt off. Ibara, a man who never failed to keep in touch with his loved ones, had gone silent. His family had last spoken with him on April 19th, just 3 days prior. In those days of silence, a deep, unsettling worry began to build. It wasn't like Jesus to suddenly go off the radar. He was close with his family, always making sure they knew he was okay. The absence of his voice on the other end of the phone was deafening. As time ticked by with no word from him, the worry evolved into panic. There had to be something wrong. And so, with growing fear, his family decided to take matters into their own hands. On April 22nd, they made their way to his apartment, praying they were wrong, hoping this was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. When they opened the door to Jesus Ibara's apartment, nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to see. Time seemed to stand still as they were confronted by a sight that would haunt them forever. The man they had known as a brother, a son, and a friend was no longer alive. Jesus Ibara's lifeless body lay before them, brutally murdered, his neck still marked from the power cord that had been used to strangle him. The shock was palpable, their minds racing to comprehend the reality before their eyes. The once vibrant man, so full of life just days earlier, had been taken from them in the most violent and unimaginable way. The image of his body, cold and lifeless, would be etched in their memories forever. But amidst their grief and confusion, they couldn't help but notice something else. Jesus' prized possessions were missing. His gold chain necklace and a ring, items that held both sentimental and material value, had been stolen. It was a violation not just of his life, but of his dignity, as the killer took more than just his life. They took what mattered to him. As if the murder itself wasn't enough, there was one more disturbing piece of the puzzle. Jesus' car had also vanished. The disappearance of his vehicle raised even more questions. Who could have done this, and why? But the real shocker would come the following day, April 23rd, when the authorities discovered Jesus Ibara's car, burned to a crisp on Peach Court, just a short distance from his apartment. The once familiar car, now reduced to ashes, was a haunting reminder of the crime that had taken place. The fire wasn't just an attempt to steal. It was a deliberate move to erase any potential evidence, to burn away the fingerprints, the DNA, the clues that might have led back to the killer. The destruction of the vehicle was a calculated move. It wasn't the work of an impulsive criminal, but someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a crime of passion alone. It was premeditated. The perpetrator had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, thinking they could outsmart investigators. But in the darkness of that burned car lay the beginning of a long and complex investigation. As the flames died down, the mystery only deepened, and the hunt for answers had just begun. San Jose detectives wasted no time in launching a full-scale investigation. The crime scene was nothing short of disturbing, but despite the shocking brutality of the murder, it offered little in terms of concrete clues. As investigators carefully combed through Ibara's apartment, they were faced with a grim reality. The home that had been his sanctuary after long workdays had now become a crime scene, where the last moments of his life had been filled with unimaginable terror. The method of the murder, strangulation with a power cord, instantly stood out. It wasn't the type of crime that would be committed in the heat of the moment by a random stranger. The personal nature of the attack, the force used to overpower Ibara, all pointed to a crime driven by emotion. This led investigators to believe that the killer knew Ibara, and this might have been more than just a robbery gone wrong. Though Ibara's gold chain necklace, ring, and car were missing, the brutality of his death suggested that there was a much deeper motive at play. Was this a crime of revenge, or perhaps a passionate outburst fueled by anger or jealousy? These were questions that detectives wrestled with in those early days. Despite the severity of the crime, detectives quickly found themselves at a dead end. The neighborhood where Ibara lived wasn't known for violent crime, and disturbingly, no one had seen or heard anything suspicious in the days surrounding the murder. There were no witnesses to the brutal attack, no neighbors who had noticed any strange individuals lurking near the apartment. The trail, it seemed, was growing cold faster than anyone expected. Investigators painstakingly pieced together the few fragments of evidence they had. The stolen items, the gold necklace, the ring, the car, seemed like clues, but they didn't lead anywhere. And the burning of Ibara's vehicle near Peach Court just a day after the murder appeared to be a calculated move by the killer to destroy any potential forensic evidence. The fire erased what could have been critical clues, including fingerprints or DNA, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. As the days turned into weeks, one question continued to haunt the investigators. Who would want Jesus Ibara dead? He wasn't known to have enemies. There was no evidence of him being involved in any disputes or dangerous activities that might lead to such a violent act. And yet, someone had taken the time to not only strangle him with a power cord, but also go to great lengths to cover their tracks. Despite the investigators' best efforts, the case began to stall. The leads were scarce, and without any immediate suspects, it seemed as though the investigation had hit a brick wall. The once active case soon slipped into the category of cold cases, a haunting mystery that loomed over San Jose with no clear resolution in sight. Meanwhile, the Ibara family was left to mourn, not just the loss of a man they loved, but also the cruel reality that justice might never be served. The crime, which had stolen Jesus Ibara's life in such a brutal manner, left an indelible mark on those who knew him. Yet, as time passed, it seemed as though the answers would forever remain elusive. Ibara's family was devastated, not only by his violent death, but also by the lack of answers. They cooperated with the police as much as they could, but even they had no idea who could have harbored such ill will against Jesus. He wasn't known to have any serious enemies or be involved in activities that could lead to something this brutal. It seemed that whoever committed the crime had done so with a clear intent to get away with it. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case eventually went cold. Investigators continued to revisit the case periodically, hoping for a break, but without any fresh leads or advances in forensic technology, they were stuck. The case remained unsolved, leaving Ibara's family with no closure. For over 3 decades, Jesus Ibara's murder case sat in the archives, another cold case among many, seemingly destined to remain unsolved. The lack of physical evidence and witnesses made it one of the more frustrating cases for investigators. However, as the years passed, advancements in forensic technology, particularly in DNA testing, began to offer new hope for cases like Ibara's, where previous investigative methods had failed. In 2024, a routine re-examination of cold case files brought Ibara's case back into the spotlight. The Santa Clara County District Attorney's Cold Case Unit, which had been formed in 2011, took a fresh look at the evidence collected from Ibara's apartment and from the area where his car had been found. Given the improvements in DNA technology, investigators decided to test several pieces of evidence that had been kept from the original crime scene. As investigators sifted through the evidence that had been preserved for decades, they made a critical decision to test the DNA on several key items from the crime scene. These included a shirt, a beer can, and a semen stain found on a blanket inside Ibara's apartment. It was a long shot, but one worth taking. And then the breakthrough came. DNA results pointed to a man named Joseph Anthony Ibara, a figure previously unknown in the investigation, but the discoveries didn't stop there. Further testing revealed that Ibara's DNA was also present on the power cord, the very tool used to strangle Jesus Ibara. This crucial link provided a direct connection between Ibara and the murder scene. For the first time since 1987, investigators had a name and a suspect. As investigators dug deeper into Joseph Anthony Ibara's background, they learned that he wasn't just a random name pulled from the DNA database. Ibara had a history of criminal behavior, including arrests for weapons charges, robbery, and identity theft. He was no stranger to the criminal justice system, but his involvement in such a brutal murder had gone undetected for years. One detail stood out. In 1987, just a month after the murder, Ibara had been living on Peach Court, less than a block away from where Ibara's torched car had been found. The proximity of his residence to the crime scene was another nail in the coffin for Ibara's defense. It seemed more than likely that he had not only committed the crime, but had remained close by, watching as the investigation unfolded and hoping he would never be caught. On September 20th, 2024, more than 3 decades after Jesus Ibara was murdered in his own home, Joseph Anthony Ibara was officially charged with the crime. The DNA evidence had built an airtight case, and Ibara now faced the prospect of 25 years to life in prison if convicted. Needless to say, the arrest of Joseph Anthony Ibara is not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of the legal battle that could finally bring closure to the family of Jesus Ibara. After 37 long years, the case has been reopened, and there is now a real chance for justice to be served. But the outcome of the trial is still uncertain, and the questions remain. Will the DNA evidence be enough to convict Ibara? How will his defense respond, and what new revelations might emerge as the trial unfolds? As we wait for the legal proceedings to take place, what do you think will happen next? Will the evidence hold up in court, or are there more twists in this case yet to come? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and press the bell icon so you don't miss any updates on this case as it moves through the courts. If you found this story engaging, be sure to like and share the video to help spread the word. And while you're here, make sure to check out our other videos that are about to appear on your screen, covering some of the most mysterious and shocking cases from the past. Stay tuned for more true crime stories that continue to captivate and intrigue.